And I had no idea how to be an entrepreneur because, of course, nobody had ever taught me entrepreneurial skills. I grew up in the corporate world, and as you know, corporate versus entrepreneur, this is a whole different set of skill sets.
A lot of people are not even coming to office. They work from home, from remote locations.
Yeah.
How do you develop empathy within teams if they don't meet each other?
Can you create emotional connection, relationships, inclusion online? Of course you can, but you have to be intentional about it. So, people don't understand what empathy is. They might think it's a soft skill, or being kind, or being nice, or being compassionate, right? All of the things which it's not. So today, 79% of the global workforce is disengaged. 79%.
Mimi, it's an honor to have you with us. Welcome. Hello, I am Prasenjit Bhattacharya, co-founder and CEO at Great Manager Institute. Welcome to one more episode of our podcast at Great Managers League podcast series. We have today a very special person whom we wanted to meet for a very long time. Mimi Nicklin is a globally recognized empathy advocate, best-selling author of Empathy at Work, founder of Empathy Everywhere, and a sought-after leadership consultant. She has over 20 years of experience. She has trained about over 20,000 professionals globally. And Mimi, it's an honor to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure. I'm so happy we can do it.
I'm sure our viewers would be very keen to know a little bit more about you, Mimi. I was really confused looking at your biodata, from a rural England background to London, to Cape Town, Dubai, Singapore,
everywhere,
Malaysia. Now,
yes.
Tell us all about your journey.
Yes, well, I am British. So I was born in the UK, but I left in my late teens, really, or just after university. And I never went back, Prasenjit. So I have been in Asia for nearly 20 years. And Asia and the Gulf, I would say. So I do a lot of work also into the Gulf. And this is where my soul is. When people ask me, about my sort of British background, I always say, well, the only thing about me that's British really is my passport, because my entire career has been in the East. Lots of work in India since I was very young. So this is my home really. And to be honest, I don't even really visit Europe. I very rarely go because my life is on this side of the world. So, but you're right. I've lived in Singapore. I've lived in Hong Kong, Dubai, Sri Lanka, Colombo, across South Africa for a large chunk of that time. And now I'm based in Malaysia. So definitely I've seen lots of Asia, but never India. So maybe I need to come to Mumbai next.
Oh wow, there's lots to see in India. I can tell you that, and of course, every country needs empathy. So India is no exception. And but before we get into Empathy Everywhere,
yes,
tell us a little bit about your professional career and where did you start?
So I started in advertising. My father was an ad man. Did you ever watch Prasenjit Mad Men on Netflix? Have you ever seen that show?
I confess I haven't.
You haven't? Okay, so it's not a new show, it's an old show. But it's a show that Netflix ran that tells the stories of the ad men of the 70s and 80s in London and New York.
Wow.
And
your dad was one of them?
He was one of them. They had a very glamorous life. I think it was much more fun than businesses today, right? But yeah, so my dad had his own advertising agency and I always wanted to be like him. So advertising is a career that most people fall into. They end up there. But for me, from 12 years old, I knew exactly I wanted to be like my dad, So yes, I went into advertising from my first job and I stayed there for my entire corporate career until I started doing this work about 4 years ago now, when life changed, actually, everything changed. But until then, I worked all around Asia, predominantly with Procter & Gamble brands, a little bit of healthcare with GlaxoSmithKline. I worked on some amazing brands outside of FMCG, some car brands, some lifestyle, some fashion. And eventually life had another plan. But it was a wonderful career. People always ask me, did you run away from the corporate world? But no, I loved the corporate. I loved my work. It wasn't an escape plan. It was just the journey continued somewhere else.
But in a sense, I would assume that you can't be very good in advertising if you are bad in empathy, because it's all about empathizing with whoever is your target group.
Absolutely.
And in some cases, articulating what they themselves have not said, but they deeply believe in.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that story. How did your experience in advertising prepare you for what you have been doing in the last 4 years?
Yes. Well, Prasenjit, I never recognized or used the word or the concept of empathy in any of those years. It wasn't until around 2018 that I kind of discovered the role of empathy in leadership and our world at large. But you're absolutely right. We were using the skill set for the entire time. We just hadn't put a name to it. And that is often the case, to be honest. When I work with leaders here in Mumbai, everywhere, wherever I am, the barrier to being able to embrace this superpower, which drives up profit and productivity and performance and everything you need, is a misunderstanding of what it is. People don't understand what empathy is. They might think it's a soft skill, or being kind, or being nice, or being compassionate, right? All of the things which it's not. In advertising, we would talk about things like insight, like you're just talking about, right? Consumer insight, or being able to understand others, or stand in the shoes of the customer or the buyer. That is empathy, the ability to perspective take. And of course, in the end, if you don't understand your buyers, whether you're B2B or B2C, how could you sell to them, right? So all the best entrepreneurs know their customers. So yes, you're absolutely right. They're using empathy all the time. It's just that we don't always know the name for the skill set that we're using.
Yes, and it would be also interesting for you to help us understand, because many advertising firms are not necessarily known for empathy within the firms themselves. And it's rather cutthroat and so on and so forth in professional services in many cases. And therefore, what was the turning point? How did you land up leaving that seemingly great career with global brands and decide to do something very different, like empathy everywhere? Tell us about that story.
So, Prasenjit, people ask me all the time now how I found my purpose. But I always tell them that I didn't find it because it found me. I really loved my career. I definitely, as I said, I didn't run away from it. But in around 2018, I moved to Dubai. And I took over a business which, let's say, was not quite as it seemed when I signed up for that CEO role. And when I arrived in Dubai, it was my first time living there. That business was significantly under pressure. It was at a very difficult situation. And the honest truth is that I had no idea how to turn it around, because I had come from these huge global businesses where I had support everywhere. Leaders and procurement and finance and legal and operation. I mean, just so much support in these businesses, right? These big advertising agencies, some of them have 100,000 plus people in them. Now I'm in a business of 40 people in a region that I've never been to, as a female in what was then still a very male world. And I had no idea how to be an entrepreneur because, of course, nobody had ever taught me entrepreneurial skills. I grew up in the corporate world. And as you know, corporate versus entrepreneur, this is a whole different set of skill sets. So in that time, safe to say, I was incredibly overwhelmed. I wanted to do the right thing. I wanted to take everything I had learned from the corporate world and make it work within this new system. So I met with a business coach and I had a cup of tea with her. And she was asking me about my leadership style. And she asked me a question, Prasenjit, that fundamentally changed my life, because she asked me to explain how I was leading. And at the time, I was talking about intuition, being a very intuitive people leader. And she stopped me and she said, Mimi, is it intuition or is it empathy? And at the time, I remember thinking, no, it's not. I mean, what's empathy got to do with the workplace? I just told you no one was using that word. But I went away and I started researching it, and I discovered something called the empathy deficit, which was actually coined by Barack Obama in 2006. And he stood up that day and he said to his audience, I know I'm supposed to be talking about our federal deficit, but I think we should talk about our empathy deficit. But we did nothing with it. That was nearly 20 years ago. Empathy is a pro-social skill set. It keeps us alive. Will it help you thrive at work? Absolutely. But without it, the human race can't survive. So it's a fundamental part of our shared humanity. And yet in 30 years, we have lost 48% of it. So I didn't feel like I had found an elephant in the room. I felt like I had found a mountain in the room in 2018 that nobody was talking about. And that maybe I should. So I did. I started to talk about it.
Hold on for a moment
Yes.
and tell me if I got you right. You are saying empathy is a unique human trait.
Yep.
Or maybe I would agree 70-80%, though one has seen seemingly acts of empathy with animals as well.
Okay,
sometimes. And you said something even more dramatic. You said in 30 years we lost 48% of it, with all the communication, with everyone being in touch with everyone else, with this conversation making its way to Instagram account of somebody, mine or yours or somebody else in the next 5 minutes. You are saying we are actually losing empathy rather than gaining empathy?
Absolutely.
Substantiate that.
Yeah. So that data, specifically that figure, comes from the University of Michigan. And that data came over a 30-year study, because it's 30-year data, where they were tracking empathy levels in graduates over 30 years to look at pro-social behavior and their ability to understand others. And fundamentally, what happened over those 30 years is that we became more and more individualistic, more and more isolated. Now, I'm not an economist, but I would assume that you could track that very closely to capitalism. So a lot of what I talk about is the balance between humanism and capitalism. We all need to make money. We're sitting today in a phenomenal corporate office. The people around us, they all want to make money. They're here to make money, and so they should. But we need to do that in a way that sustains our people, because they are the ones making the money, right? They are the human force behind our ability to grow. So we need to reconnect our world, which is why, for me, my mission is to reconnect 1 million people by 2028. And a lot of that is via the corporate world, by working with teams like yours, to say, how do we remind people of the power of connection? Because you were born knowing this. We forget. It's a skill set. We forget to use it. We get out of practice.
At Great Manager Institute, when we work with managers, and we have worked with about 100,000 of them so far, there is a very simple formula for a manager. It's called connect, develop, inspire. Nothing can happen without the connect.
Yes, absolutely.
Where you build trust. And when you see something not happening in develop and inspire, you have to go back to connect.
I couldn't agree more. I love that. We can be friends forever now. Our models are the same. Amazing.
So therefore, it is understood that humans have this unique ability. You can call it, maybe thanks to the prefrontal cortex, of being able to put oneself in the other person's shoes, understand the feelings and emotions of other people. It is also understood that if you do that, there is a higher level of trust. And next time I have to sign an agreement with you, I'm not reading each and every line, because I know you understand me and you know I understand you. There are obvious business benefits. On the other hand, there is this dog eat dog kind of environment, survival of the fittest. climb the corporate ladder at any cost. So why is it so difficult to practice empathy in context of the workplace?
So what's interesting, Prasenjit, is the exact example you just gave. So, and I write about this in my new book here in India, which is called Empathy at Work. And I talk about this exact thing you just said, which is survival of the fittest. So survival of the fittest became an understood reality, but it's flawed because it's wrong. There is no such thing as survival of the fittest because we survive in groups. So if you go back to look at how we evolved as humans when we were cavemen and women, if somebody left the tribe, either they died, probably them, or the tribe would suffer, or eventually maybe the tribe would die, right? If the lead hunter left, nobody got fed, then the tribe would die off. That's the meaning of pro-social. So why is it so hard? Because for many years in the corporate world, propagated by capitalism, by this very performance-driven anxiety, we have been repeating that to each other, to our children, to everybody for decades, that you must survive with the fittest and you must fight and you must push and you must perform. But what we are seeing now is the result of that. So today, 79% of the global workforce is disengaged. 79%. So imagine in an office we're in today, someone told me as we came in that there's 10,000 people working in this business. 79% of 10,000 people are disengaged. I mean, that is a huge, huge liability on your balance sheet, right? On top of that, 52% of us are lonely. So if we take it out of just corporate for a moment, as human beings, half of the world statistically is suffering with loneliness. Now, loneliness is as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So our loneliness is killing us. The highest burden to our healthcare systems worldwide is not cancer or diabetes or heart disease. It's loneliness. So I would argue that this many decade-long train that we've been on to say, you cannot ever show an emotion, you cannot bring any of the humanity into the workplace because we are here to work, was flawed from the very beginning, because that's just not how the human brain works. You cannot reach your full potential from a neurological point of view when you are working under stress and anxiety. That's just how the human body works. So for all of the leaders out there that do not subscribe to this, well, you're fighting with science. So good luck.
Let me again give you maybe a contrarian thought.
Please.
I agree with you. Survival of the fittest, Darwin's theory of evolution, is not the reason why human beings are so successful. The reason why human beings are so successful is because somewhere they figured out that 5 people can carry a log which is too heavy for one to carry.
Exactly.
And then, of course, you talked about the tribe and why we survived, because the tribe gave us protection. And
Yes.
in turn, we were forced to stand on guard duty during the night or whatever else that we have to do. Now, the moment we started working together as a community, we came out of Africa or colonized the entire world. Everybody understands that, or at least they should. But there is a problem. If 5 people are carrying that log, which is too heavy for one to carry, the chimps can't do that, the apes can't do that, monkeys can't do that, only human beings can do that. But the third person is only pretending to carry the log. He is what we call as a freeloader.
Yes.
So what happens to all those freeloaders if you were to only talk about empathy with everyone? Don't we have a problem of non-performance in organizations, and how do you deal with that problem?
So look, empathy is purely the skill set to understand. It's the ability to decode human information. So the way I would answer that, Prasenjit, I would say that your third person carrying the log that is freeloading, why? Right? Why? Why are they freeloading? Are they disengaged? Are they unwell? Are they unable? Do they not have the skills? Have they not been given the training? Do they feel excluded? Are they demotivated? Do they not like you? Right? There will be a reason, because all human behavior is driven by a reason. And actually, all motivation is relational, right? So for all human beings, our motivation is relational. We do things as part of our relationships with others, right? To make somebody proud. Maybe that might be us and how we see ourselves in our teams. Maybe it might be to create safety. So we might carry on working in a role that we hate because I'm the dad and I want to support my family, right? So motivation is relational. So the third man on the log, in this case, why? So what I would say to the leader of those men is find out why your third man is freeloading, and that is your empathy. You don't have to be nice to be empathetic. There's nothing nice about empathy. Empathy is simply the skill set of understanding, which is why you will find it deeply embedded into the FBI. And for example, the FBI's models of driving motivational change in hostage situations, right? Why is this man holding up a bank? Why has he taken hostages? Why is he threatening to kill people? When the army goes to war, the army handbooks, for example, in the USA, teach all soldiers, it's mandatory to learn empathy before they go to a war zone. Now, they're not learning it to be nice to the villagers. They're learning it to understand their environment so that they can go to war and, win their war. Mm-hmm. This is a skill set. So whether it's the man carrying the log or it's a team in your organization, empathy is purely the ability to understand why they're performing that way and how they can perform differently. What you do with that information is entirely up to you.
And why are we losing this skill set? Is capitalism the only thing to blame, or what else is happening here, in your opinion?
So we have two great challenges. One is low time, and the other is high stress. If we asked your audience, so you and I will be in front of your wonderful audience at your summit tomorrow, right? So maybe 700 people. If we ask those 700 people to put their hand up, if in their lives they have not enough time and too much stress, 90% are going to say yes. Because that is the world that we have created for ourselves, especially when you're in cities like Mumbai, right? Busy, 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 life, 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 meeting, meeting, meeting. Any skill set needs some level of attention. But if you are too busy running around under high levels of stress, the way your brain responds, it's called the fight or flight response, but the way that the brain responds is that it removes energy, blood, oxygen, from the parts of the brain that allow you mentioned it earlier, to use the prefrontal cortex. To take away the science, fundamentally, when you don't have enough time and you're too stressed, you are not able to put yourself in the shoes of others, to take evidence, to study, to understand, to use your curiosity, and fundamentally, to listen. The work I am doing, yes, it's to create more understanding of empathy, but the delivery of that is listening. We are terrible listeners. Not you, you're a great listener.
And in essence, what that means is that if you're not able to listen to your colleagues, they're not able to listen to those in the front line, they don't listen to the customers, Absolutely. And that's how you kill your business.
Yes, I mean, NPS scores, so Net Promoter Scores, which of course measure customer loyalty, jump by nearly 20 points when the organization has high levels of empathy internally. So when you make an effort to understand your staff, and let me be very clear again, this is not about being nice to them. You can be nice. It's not about being nice. It's simply about understanding. When you teach that to your staff culturally, they show it to their customers operationally. And we see NPS scores go up. So you make more money. 23% actually, 23% higher profits in organizations that embed empathy into culture.
There is another compelling reason, and I would love to know from you that, is that something which the corporate world really cares about? In India, 50 people commit suicide every week because of workplace stress. I mean, we know the stories about people committing suicide in the farming community because they can't pay off their loans, but we don't hear about 50 suicides every week. And you multiply that by the number of weeks you have in a year. There's only one thing common amongst all these 50 people who dies or decides to take their lives. They all have a manager who couldn't figure it out or who couldn't prevent it. managers are not always responsible, but they could not stop that suicide.
Mm.
Imagine the manager having a little more empathy to know what's happening with the other person. We actually can save lives. But that's not a story that I'm going to probably tell to a corporate audience.
No, look, I mean, I'll tell you a story in reply to your story. When I started this work, I told you 2018, and this lady had asked me about empathy, and I was at home and I was studying this and uncovering this. And in a similar vein, I found some data that stopped me in my tracks, which was that the second biggest killer of our youth is no longer vehicle accidents, but suicide. So our children, not just our workers, but our children are killing themselves rather than staying on the planet with us because they feel they don't belong, because they think we don't understand them. That is the empathy deficit in action, right? The inability to feel connection to others, that you don't get me is what they'd say. You don't get me, mum, right? You don't get me what I want, right? When people don't feel that they belong, it starts to break away our own humanity, because we are tribes, men and women. We are meant to be together. If you think about the prison system, Prasenjit, the deepest form of punishment is solitary confinement. The worst thing you can do to a human is to put them in a room alone. And yet we seem set on living alone. So I think the data you're talking about is a stark wake-up call. What I would say is that, as you said, of course, managers can't be responsible for the mental health of others. But in the same time, you can create no sustained level of well-being in an organization. And I know there's many, I'm sure, of your clients as well who are trying to put in the right practices, for well-being programs and health. You cannot sustain well-being without belonging, without understanding, because there's no yoga program or fruit bowl that will make up for what you and I are talking about, which is I do not have a place in this case, the organization. So getting that right, making sure that your managers, to be great managers, know how to create connectivity, know how to pull teams together. And again, it's not their responsibility to solve for mental health, but it is their responsibility to create environments where humans can thrive for their profit margins, 23% more of them for human beings. So I think it's, when you look at the state of the workplace at large, we're not doing very well as humans. And I think that there's a long way. In fact, there's quite an easy way back to building that level of sort of thriving humanism and capitalism in teams.
There is one thing that may come in the way. You talked about low time and high stress, which is the reality for most people. But unlike in the past, a lot of people are not even coming to office. They work from home, from remote locations. How do you develop empathy within teams if they don't meet each other? Isn't that a challenge that you see?
It is a challenge. It is a challenge. It's a challenge to build any level of relationship without proximity, for sure. Is it possible? Of course it is. I met your team. Until this week, I've not met your team in person, including you. But because I've been working with some of the other people in your team very closely, when I saw them, it's like a reunion of life. Hi! Oh my gosh, we're together, finally. That's real. But that was built online, right? So can you create emotional connection, relationships, inclusion online? Of course you can, but you have to be intentional about it. But that is a big part of creating empathy anywhere. I always say there are 3 steps to it. The first is awareness, which is what you and I are doing right now. So thank you for the opportunity. We are creating awareness of what the skill set is. The second step is intentionality, right? As a leader, as a manager, you have to want to make a better business. You have to want to create a best place to work or a team that wants to stay or high performance. It's not going to happen on its own. And then the third step is accountability. You have to measure people at this. You have to tell them it's an expectation and you are being measured on that, whether it's as formal as KPIs, key performance indicators, or it's just part of culture or the values that you hold as a business. If you don't invest in a relationship, if I don't call you again after this week and I don't see you, we won't be friends. You'll be like, oh yeah, Mimi, I met her once in 2025. If I want to build a relationship with you, Passenger, I have to invest in it, whether that's on Zoom or the phone or WhatsApp, in order to maintain it. So is it harder? Yes, it's harder. It would be much easier if I was your next door neighbour. But given I live in Kuala Lumpur, I'm going to have to put in the effort.
Well, that's actually a wonderful suggestion. That's one place I've never been to.
Oh, come.
So I can use empathy as an excuse to have a very nice trip to KL. Jokes apart, from what I hear you saying, I'm assuming it's difficult for humans to switch on empathy the moment you reach home and switch it off when you are in office, because you have to take cold decisions. And therefore it is something that's very useful for you even in office, and maybe particularly in office as well. And I'm just curious, no leader wakes up in the morning saying to herself or himself that it's a beautiful day, let me go and make people miserable by not showing any empathy. And yet, the first opportunity, they lose it. And of course, the excuse is low time and high stress. But what do I do if I have to get out of it because I realize that empathy will give me better results? Do you have any quick fixes?
So, I mean, I think the first thing I'll say, I do have some solutions, but I think the first thing we have to recognize is how much pressure there is on us as leaders, on that gentleman or that lady who's waking up in the morning. In Q1 this year, Prasenjit, we had the highest level of CEO resignations in the Fortune 500 in history, 233. Right?
Oh, wow, really?
233 Fortune 500 CEOs, and these are phenomenally, impressive, powerful, experienced CEOs said, I'm done.
And this is in what time span?
This is in the first quarter. I mean, the resignations were in the quarter, Q1 2025, right? That's where that data is coming from. So what that tells me is it's just too much. This world is just too much, right? We have to find ways to work through that high stress, that low time, that intensive requirement on leadership today, not only to know their customers, their financial bottom line and their own staff, but the myriad of social realities around that, whether it's maternity leave, paternity leave, inclusion, diversity, mental well-being, health, working from home, economic uncertainty, social uncertainty, war. This is a lot, right? So when you say nobody wakes up and says, I just want to be awful today and make life difficult, no, of course they don't, but they're part of it. They're part of that difficult reality that we're all working through. So I think it's very important to recognize, again, if any leaders are listening to this, how hard your job is, right? It's really hard. That recognition alone will help you move forwards, right? So when I talk about those 3 steps, I said the first one was awareness. You have to recognize your reality. We often talk about self-empathy, but that's a different topic from this show. In terms of really easy ways to solve for that, or not easy, but simple, I think there's probably quite a big difference. Simple ways to solve for that. The first thing I would say is to work on your listening. So I work a lot with leaders to teach what I call listening-led leadership. We are terrible listeners. We tell each other to listen, but we don't teach each other to listen, and it is a skill set. So the first thing to do is to be very conscious of your ability to listen, to make eye contact, to be aware of your body language, to actually listen to understand versus listening to reply, which is what most leaders do most of the time. The second thing I would say is you have to learn to be very comfortable with moments of silence, and within that comes risk. So you have to be comfortable with risk, because if you're going to listen to others, you have to create space for them to speak. I do a lot of business in India. I have done a lot of business in India since I was very young. So I learned about Indian business culture a very long time ago. And the reality is here that if you don't speak up loud and fast, you often don't speak up at all, right? Especially if you're in a room that's extremely busy. But we need to slow that down, because what will happen is the very loud voices will only be the only ones that you ever hear. right? So to be a listening-led leader, you have to be able to listen to others, to slow down, to make that connection. And the second part of that is to ask really good questions. If you don't ask, you will never know, right? And as we've said, this is your data. This is your data to make better decisions, to lower your risk, to improve your profit, to reduce turnover, to drive up motivation, to improve your loyalty scores. So it's not necessarily a quick fix, but it's a worthwhile one.
And one of the risks, quote unquote, that you end up taking in this process is being vulnerable. Because if you are listening, you can't shut off the other person who has hit a raw nerve, or you have to actually show some degree of vulnerability. How easy or difficult is it for leaders to do that? Or can you show empathy without being vulnerable?
Yeah, I don't think you need vulnerability. I think vulnerability is a very dangerous word in the business world, because the reality is the business world is still run by men. That's just the world we live in, and that's not a problem. You ask a man, any male leader on the whole, and I'm stereotyping and creating just a judgment for the sake of conversation, but you ask a man if he's comfortable or willing or open to being vulnerable. I don't have this data, but I'm guessing nearly 100% are going to say no, right? This is not a skill set that people want to embrace because it's not something that they're experienced in, they're not comfortable with it. If we associate these skills in leadership around listening, driving motivation, inclusion, psychological safety with vulnerability, we will fail. And if we fail our children. We fail the world. We have to fix this. So no, I don't think it's to do with being vulnerable. I think it's to do with being confident. I think for a long time we told people that you need to speak up to be heard, that you need to hold your value in a room. But what if the value is in the room and not in you? So yesterday, somebody asked me for one of my, tips. And I said to her, you should speak when spoken to. And she said, Mimi, that is so old-fashioned, right? That's like what we used to tell children in Victorian times. But the context of that is that if you become a leader that is comfortable with not always speaking when you walk in a room, wait for somebody to ask you your opinion. You will find that over time, your power is when you do speak. So I don't think it has anything to do with being vulnerable. I think it has everything to do with being confident and in knowing your power in the room. Speak when spoken to, or speak when it's your opportunity to speak, but you don't have to speak the rest of the time. You don't need to be vulnerable to listen to other people. You just need to be.
But you do need to be confident to sometimes say, I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah, but that's also confidence, right? That's also confidence to say, do you know what? I'm a really good leader, but I don't know the answer. That doesn't make me vulnerable. It just makes me clear, right? It makes me accurate. I don't know the answer. Give me a day.
And you think it's okay to say that?
I think you absolutely should say that. And in this day and age, your junior members of the team will respect you and stay far more loyal if you do. But the days of maybe our fathers that felt they couldn't do that, they've gone. We're not living in that world anymore. To say to you, if you asked me a question that I didn't know in this interview, I would say, do you know what, Prasenjit? I don't know, but I'm really interested, so I'm going to find out and I'm going to WhatsApp you tomorrow. Am I leaving and you thinking, oh, that Mimi, she's rubbish? There's one question. And as a leader, I can find the answer. So I don't think that's about weakness or vulnerability. I think that's about clarity and responsibility.
And honesty and integrity and consistency and everything that leadership is all about. Mimi, it's been a delight talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been a joy.